your way. Go ahead.
You're talking about education and the teaching and waking us up and being allies. Do you have a suggestion of what African American literature can?
Yeah, there are lots of places you can do that. That I think one of the things that's dangerous is, and we've seen this through things like African American History Month in February, okay? Where if you're an elementary student, you know everything there is to know about 17 people. Because it's the same 17 people every freaking February, right? And so the danger is developing a small canon. Okay? But there is a huge body of writers out there. And there's a huge field of history that needs to be explored. I had the opportunity to work with a group called the American Social History Project that was started at New York City College, but picked up here by the Mott Middle College group on Mott's campus. And a number of teachers in the Flint area that I work with, Margaret Fox, Pat McHugh, Lila Rivard, Eric Wood, Joe Ufinger, some amazing people, were able to pick it up and do some new things with it. But what we found was that traditionally history has to be either presidents or war. And that's pretty much how we teach history. We grabbed a piece, we found a gentleman in the American Revolution who was part of the Boston Tea Party group. But there is a small letter that somebody found that post-revolution, after the government had been established, that this gentleman was walking down the street and saw Nathan Hale, or not Nathan Hale, who was it? Oh shoot. Revere, that's who it was. It was Revere, because it was in Boston. So he sees Revere and does not salute. And Revere recognized the man as having been in his company at some point and stops him and says, "You're not going to salute a superior officer?" And the gentleman looked him dead in the face and said, "No, that's why I fought the revolution." Those are the stories that need to get told. So rather than talk about John Kennedy and his fight in the civil rights movement, every high school student should understand and be able to quote Fannie Lou Hamer. And understand what it means when you say, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." That body of work's got to grow. So there are lots of places online that you can find that. One of the things I'm currently doing is because I teach elementary ed methods classes, I'm trying to develop a bigger library for myself around at a children's level. And I mean, she asked that question, but she's actually doing this too. And finding Native American, Hispanic, Asian, African, South American literature and stories. Because one of the things that we have a tendency to do is we pass on the things that were our favorites in school. Teachers are like everybody else. You know, parents tell your children the stories you heard as a child. Teachers will do the same thing. This was my favorite story in school, so I'll pass it on. Okay? It's amazing to me that there are very few children in America today who understand or have ever heard the Brer Rabbit story. Because they got bred out. And so we need to be able to bring those kinds of things back in. But instead of telling a Paul Bunyan story, we should be telling an Anansi the Spider story. That we need to begin to, that first generation, it's going to have to be a very conscious thing. I'm going to have to find something. But eventually, once we share enough multicultural stories, that becomes the norm. So what we're really trying to do is normalize what has been to this point the non-normative procedure. So what we can do as people in the community, I mean, there are, as I look around the room, there are several teachers here, or soon to be. So we can do that in our classroom, but you don't have to have a classroom to do that either. You can make sure that your kids hear different stories. You can make sure that when you hear a conversation, you get engaged in a positive and loving way. Because yelling at somebody and telling them they're an idiot is probably not the best way to change their mind. I know sometimes it feels better that way, but it's not always really effective. So that's some of the things that I would say. So are there questions that you have about things you've wondered about, or what can we do to become better allies, those kinds of things? Right.
You mentioned building a lot of literature. Have you considered possibly using musical literature as well, and kind of using that as a cross-disciplinary point of reference or comparison, even to analyze the oral rhetoric as well as the written rhetoric of what contributions activities make. Yeah.
I think, yeah, and technology allows us to do that. There's a lot of things we can do. I had to go to Dudley's class to hear some of these people speak. And I remember hearing Robert Hayden as a poet read. He's got a voice about 3 octaves lower than mine. I mean, I'd marry the man if I got the chance. So to hear him read his poetry is very different than just reading. So yeah, to use technology in different ways and to have storytellers and music and things like that as part of it as well. There is a brilliant series for anybody in the elementary level that Wynton Marsalis did on teaching music, because he is always a teacher, as much as he is this incredible player. But he's always teaching things, and he does a really nice piece using the Nutcracker, because he compares Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker to Ellington's Nutcracker, and can talk about things like syncopation, or rhythm, and all these different musical concepts for elementary kids to understand. But if you use those 2 bases, you can hear them absolutely. You can find the difference. And yet it's the same piece of music. So yeah, there's lots of stuff out there I think that you can use like that. That would be great. And I think that's one of the reasons why I have a high level of hope. Okay? When I look at the faces in the room, I realize that the younger generation is much better at this than my generation. Okay? I had to learn this. I was blessed that I ran into people like my 3 roommates in college, that I ran into people like Tracy Curry, that I ran into people like Delma and Natasha Thomas Jackson. That I get people who support me. Because sometimes I still will say, something for issue. And instead of getting slapped upside the head, somebody will say, you might want to consider that. And that lets me grow. So I'm blessed that I have those people around me. And I would encourage everybody to create families around you. We're all in need of support systems for a number of different reasons. I have, my blind side is really feminist literature. I really have a lack of depth and understanding in that area. And my wife will probably be happy to tell you how deep that lack goes. But that's a place I need to So I continue to grow in my community. I begin to find people who can share those titles with me, share those authors with me. Because I'm still working on, like titles like Free to Be You and Me, which is a great book, but it was written in what, 1965 or something? Martin Luther Thomas wrote it. Somebody here know? So we've got to grow in those things. So I think that's a part of who we are and what we do as well.
Do you want to share with them when you brought in a new title into some of your classes, some of the struggles you went to change the acceptable?
It's an interesting piece. I mean, as you bring things in. When I first started teaching, I taught at Detroit Catholic Central, which is an all-boys prep school down in the Detroit area. And I had them read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And one of the young men in my class, his father was a Detroit police officer. And his reaction was, hell no. And it was a really interesting conversation I had with Tom when he came in, and sits down at my desk, right? He came into my classroom, sat down at my desk, and put his revolver on the desk, just to be clear. But you had that conversation. I knew why he was scared by that book. Because you don't get defensive if you're just disagreeing. You get defensive when you're scared. So I had to speak to what it was that was scaring me. And eventually, I got to the point where he read the book along with his son Joe. So you've got to take that time. Sometimes you're going to have those explanations. When I was teaching in Flint, I brought in 2 or 3 different books into my IB curriculum that were Islamic. And a number of people in Flint had a very strong difficulty with Islamic literature. And it's important, you've got to explain to people that you're not proselytizing something, you're simply putting information out there. The more I know about something, the more I'm able to deal with it. I don't want to be scared out of ignorance. I want to be informed about things. So, yeah, those are some of the things that you
What is IB?
Go ahead.
What is IB?
IB is the International Baccalaureate Program.
Oh. And so I'm trying to get my head around, I can see a teacher making a difference. I'm trying to get my head around school board. And, and I can see urban school boards buying in. I think immediately of Kansas. I lived in Missouri for a very long time right on the Kansas border. I know that area very well. And the conservatism up there. And so I wonder, I'm not sure even what my question is, Jeff. It's just that, how do you move? Our teachers are going to have problems with, I think, their school boards or the principals or...
Absolutely. That, I was able to, one of the things that I think I learned to do well in my career was to work under the radar. That when I had an upset parent, I immediately had them come and see me. I never let that parent go to the principal. And so, I think what we can do as communities is, one, begin to run for those positions. But you're right, where it's most needed, again, we don't need to instill this in the Flint School Board. I need to do it in North Dakota, or Iowa, or Texas. And it's going to take time. But again, you begin to develop pockets around you of people who do understand. And then out of that pocket, you need to find somebody who will become the activist. Not everybody is going to be an activist. Not everybody can go out and march. Not everybody can go out and do those things. Okay? There are powerful people that can. Ms. Biggs does that incredibly well. So, for some people, that's what works. For some people, it's just having somebody over for coffee and talking. But talking about those things, being intentional about the conversations that you have, And so I think that's how that starts.
Yeah, it really sort of the right under the radar grassroots concept.
Right, right. And that's where it comes, it's us as opposed to us that's going to do that.
Individuals as opposed to school.
Right, right.
And I think with, respecting country, with the codes book, and then the new Pro book.
Oh, yeah,
that
the new Pro.
we talked about, and some other reading organizations, that's getting the conversation started. And I think by doing that, especially in some of the more conservative, that connects the allies. You got the same, so it's small little stuff like that that are not so intimidating.
Well, and I was just gonna say, and I think you're right too, that the younger individuals who are in school becoming teachers, they're much more together about all of this, much more comfortable, and so they're going to be kind of a powerhouse for this that we didn't have.
Right. I mean, I can say easily that Malik and my son found each other much more comfortably than anybody of my generation would have been able to do that. And I don't think it's any mystical thing that they got. It's that they were smart enough to stay away from the adults and not let them screw up their world. So we can do that. Was there a question?
Oh, I thought but I do.
Tracy's calling people out there. Dr. Curry, yes.
And you talked about this, but you're a refluency from kind of person that I know of, and you mentioned high levels of hope. I guess, and it sounds like some of the stories you shared have positive outcomes. I'm interested in the teacher, the people that you come across with the boards where they're very resistant and the outcome isn't positive. Like, how do you deal with that as a person or as the role that you play? Like, when the resistance is hard, and so they're not reading Malcolm X no matter what you say. Like, well, what do you do?
I think I have two responses to what you're talking about. The first is just as reaction to a school board. I never had much luck with the Flint School Board. Again, why I operated under the radar. Under that idea that it's always easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Whenever I went to the school board, I was most frequently told no, and I would get very frustrated. I think part of the way I handled that was I always went back to my classroom. That my students were, again, this is where I got much more out of my classes than my students did. They were incredibly supportive of me. So if I have a group around me that understands and supports what I'm doing, then I think I can get through those disappointments. But I would also say, I think in response to your question, that I never stopped going. Which you can either say is really courageous or really stupid. At a point, you realize it's a wall. Either move over and find the door or put a helmet on. And I don't know that I was bright enough to do either of those two things. But I think that's how you deal with it, is you continue to. And when you run into things like boards, those traditional seats of authority, those are still people. If I made movement, it was because I was able to reach out and touch a couple of the board members. In my last year there, Oliver was the board president, and he was somebody who would listen to me. And I felt like he really wanted to do some good things. And he said sometimes, but I can't move the rest of these people. But I think had we been there long enough and persevered enough, then you find ways to get those people to come around. So I guess the answer to your question would be that you begin to do that Chinese water torture. Just a drop at a time, and eventually you break the brick. Does that answer?
Yes.
And then we also got around to doing, independent studies, and we got around with some of the things, especially the Flannery book.
Not that I'll talk about it. There's still lawsuits.
But that's why we did things underground, right?
Yeah.
That's
Right.
That's the point.
Right.
You gotta go on.
But I think that the thing to keep in mind too is, and I suppose that's one of the reasons why I became a teacher, and I realized what Donna was saying is that we can't all be teachers, but because working with younger people, it's much more fluid. I had a conversation around a Flannery O'Connor book in a Flint Public School. And Flannery O'Connor, if you're not familiar with her work, she's a Southern writer who was very anti-segregation, but wrote about the South that was. They're harsh stories to read. But I had young people in my class who were willing to do that. I asked their permission. And so, but if I didn't ask an adult about that, no way that book would have been. But that conversation is probably one of the most memorable days of my teaching career, because it was very real and very honest. And so you find those things. But there are experiences outside of my classroom that I had as well. Malik's mother came in to see me one time when I was at Whittier, and at that point it was in my office. I used to keep it in my classroom. I didn't have a real classroom at that year. So I had a poster of Angela Davis. And, it is the wanted poster of Angela Davis. And I'll tell this story as quickly as I can. But Anne's family, I married into a family of government spies. Okay? Her uncle was J. Edgar Hoover's secretary. Okay? So as they found out I was interested in what turned out to be the favorite niece, they discovered that I already had a fairly significant FBI file. And they wanted to let me know that. We got along. I don't believe that anybody in the family ever used my name. They just referred to me as the liberal. But they thought I was okay. So Jack, before he passed, realized that I had this affinity that I think Angela Davis is one of the most brilliant minds going. And so he sent me the original FBI wanted poster of Angela Davis. Now, I put that up on my wall, but around it, I put quotes and a couple of Boondocks cartoons, okay? Because I wanted people to know that. But when Malik's mom walked into my office and turned around and saw the wanted poster, her first comment was, "I don't think so, Mr. And I understood absolutely where she was coming from. But we then had the opportunity to have that conversation. And she found out how much Angela transformed me and shaped my brain. Okay? And I found out how much Angela meant to her. Okay? And so we began to develop a friendship as well. Okay? Those are the things that change us. Those are the things that shift a community. And things change slowly. I was talking to somebody the other day about, I used to be an assistant football coach. And on one Saturday night, we played on Friday night, and on Saturday night, Midland was playing Midland Dow. And so Joe and I went up to scout for them because we had the day off. And we're walking through Dow Stadium, in Midland. And I just got nervous. And I couldn't figure it out. And I looked at you, Finger, and he smiled at me and he goes, wait, they make you nervous. Damn! That you learn that eventually. Okay? That my world had shifted. That the world that I grew up in Sturgis, Michigan, I'm not comfortable in anymore. I'm a visitor in my hometown. This is my hometown. This is where I live now. This is where I raised my family. And so it's through those kinds of conversations that things shift. And I know that if I've changed, other people have changed as well. And so those are the things that can happen.